Several died without ever telling the world the truth. Others took their secrets to the grave. And the industry, it moved on, as if they never existed. These are the 15 men the British film industry erased. For decades, the British entertainment industry ran on image control, and the men on this list paid the price for it. Some hid for years, some hid for their entire careers. These are their stories, and they are more powerful than you think. George Michael. George Michael sold over 115 million records. Women worshipped him. The world adored him. But behind that magnetic smile was a man living a double life he did not choose. His management believed his career would collapse if the truth came out. So he hid for years. He gave half-truthful interviews. He kept relationships invisible. It was not until a 1998 arrest in Beverly Hills that the world finally found out. George did not plan that moment. But what he did next was remarkable. He owned it completely. No shame, no apology, just honesty, arriving years too late. Freddie Mercury. Few names in music carry as much power as Freddie Mercury. The Queen frontman was one of the most electric performers in rock history, and one of the most guarded. Freddie never publicly confirmed his sexuality during his lifetime, not once. His relationships with men were considered an open secret in music circles, yet he refused to address them publicly. The reason was not cowardice, it was survival. In the 1970s and 1980s, coming out could end a career overnight. Radio stations would drop your music, venues would cancel bookings. Freddie chose his art above everything else. He performed to 70,000 people at a time while protecting a private life most never saw. He carried that secret until the very last day of his life. Elton John. Elton John's story is not as simple as most people assume. Yes, he came out as bisexual in a 1976 Rolling Stone interview. That was bold for its era. But here is what gets overlooked. 8 years later, in 1984, Elton married a woman, Renate Blauel. The marriage lasted 4 years. He has since acknowledged that he had not fully accepted himself at that point. The confession came before the understanding. It took years more before Elton fully embraced his identity as a gay man. He entered a civil partnership with David Furnish in 2005, and they married in 2014. Today, he is one of the loudest LGBTQ voices on the planet. But getting there was complicated, painful, and deeply human. The journey behind the icon is nothing like the image. Ian McKellen. Before Gandalf, before Magneto, before his knighthood. Ian McKellen was a young actor hiding something enormous. He spent decades working in theatre, film and television while keeping a fundamental part of himself carefully locked away. The world saw the talent, it did not see the truth. That changed in 1988. Ian McKellen came out during a live BBC radio debate about Section 28, the British law banning the promotion of homosexuality in schools. He was 49 years old. That moment was not just personal, it was political. It was one of the most publicly courageous things any British entertainer had done up to that point. He has since marched in pride parades across the world, campaigned for LGBTQ rights globally, and become one of the most respected advocates in the movement. But it took half a lifetime to get there, and that timeline tells its own devastating story. Jonathan Bailey. Jonathan Bailey is one of the most in-demand British actors alive right now. His role in Bridgerton turned him into a global phenomenon. But what most fans watching him play Viscount Anthony Bridgerton never knew is that Jonathan had spent years concealing a core part of who he was. He revealed in 2022 that early in his acting career he felt real industry pressure to stay quiet about his sexuality. Auditions, agent conversations, the unspoken understanding of what a leading man was supposed to look like. Jonathan felt he had to choose between honesty and his career. For years, he chose his career. But here is what makes his story different from almost everyone else on this list. When he finally did speak, he was not forced out. He was not caught out. He chose the moment entirely on his own terms. His career did not collapse. It exploded. His story proves what many before him were never allowed to discover. Duncan James. Duncan James was the heartthrob of Blue, one of Britain's biggest boy bands of the early 2000s. Posters, magazine covers, teen dreams built entirely around his image. And behind that image was a man secretly dating men while being marketed as every female fan's fantasy. The pressure was relentless. Boy bands are commercial products. Management teams know exactly what sells and what does not. For years, Duncan maintained a public persona that was completely separate from his private reality. He later came out and spoke with striking honesty about how exhausting that life was, about the guilt of performing a version of yourself that does not exist. What makes Duncan's story more than just a personal one is what it reveals about the industry machinery. It was not just one man hiding, it was an entire system demanding that he hide. And that system did not care what it cost him, only what it could sell. Boy George. Boy George walked onto the British music scene in the early 1980s and broke every rule in the book. The makeup, the braids, the layered clothing. Culture Club was unlike anything Britain had seen before, and yet even within that radical visual identity, Boy George was playing a careful game. His image implied everything while confirming nothing. The tabloids circled constantly but struggled to pin him down. In an era before social media and instant exposure, there was still room to exist in the space between public and private. Boy George has spoken about navigating that ambiguity deliberately. His presentation was a form of armor. What his story reveals is something fascinating about 1980s Britain. Queerness was sometimes tolerated when it was dressed in art and performance. The same reality in a different frame might have been destroyed entirely. He was radical enough to open doors, careful enough to stay standing. That balance was its own act of genius. Andrew Scott. Andrew Scott became one of the most talked-about actors in British television almost overnight. His performance as the priest in Fleabag was magnetic, devastating, completely unforgettable. The character had no name. The world simply called him the hot priest. And suddenly, Andrew Scott was everywhere. What many viewers still do not know is that Andrew Scott is openly gay, and has been for years. But he has made a very deliberate choice. He keeps his private life private. In an industry that often demands celebrities perform their personal lives for public consumption, Andrew has drawn a firm line. He is out. He is comfortable. But his relationships are his own. His story challenges something important. Being openly gay does not mean surrendering every corner of your life to public scrutiny. Andrew Scott has carved out a way to live authentically without becoming a headline. That quiet, firm boundary is actually one of the most radical things any celebrity can do today. Simon Callow. Simon Callow is not a name that dominates trending topics, but in the history of British entertainment, what he did was quietly revolutionary. He is an actor, author and theatre director who became one of the very first British public figures to insist on being openly gay in documented interviews. This was the 1980s. Section 28 was being written into law. Being openly gay in a professional setting carried genuine legal and social consequences. And Simon Callow pushed back anyway. He demanded that his sexuality be included in published interviews. He challenged editors and journalists who tried to remove or soften that information. He understood something fundamental. Visibility saves lives. If a respected working professional could be openly gay and still have a career, it changed what was possible for every young person watching. Simon Callow may not be the most famous name on this list, but he may be the most important. The ground he broke is still being walked on today. Alan Carr. Alan Carr has made millions of people laugh. His quick wit, his chat shows, his panel appearances. He is one of Britain's most beloved comedians. But the young man who became that comedian carried very real pain for a long time. Alan grew up in a household shaped by football culture. His father, Bobby Carr, was a well-known football manager. Masculinity was the default setting, and Alan did not fit it. He has spoken openly about being bullied as a child, about feeling different long before he had words for why, about the quiet agony of growing up knowing something about yourself that the world around you did not want to hear. What makes Alan's story connect with so many people is how ordinary that experience feels despite his extraordinary career. Millions of people recognize it. the hiding, the waiting, the moment you can finally breathe. Alan turned that pain into laughter. That is not just talent, that is survival. Ollie Alexander. Ollie Alexander never played by the industry's rules. As the frontman of Years and Years and a celebrated actor, he built a career on emotional honesty from the very beginning. But even he felt the industry's unspoken expectations pressing in. The music world has a checklist for male pop stars: how they should look, who they should be seen with, what they should say. Ollie Alexander tore that checklist apart. He spoke about his sexuality not as a dramatic revelation but simply as a fact, his normal, and in doing so, he gave something priceless to a generation of young fans who had never seen themselves reflected in a stadium. His story is particularly powerful because of when it happened. The social media era makes hiding harder, but it also makes scrutiny more intense. Ollie chose full visibility anyway. He used his platform for advocacy around LGBTQ rights and mental health. Talent and courage, together in the same person. That combination is genuinely rare. Stephen Fry. Stephen Fry is one of the finest minds Britain has ever produced. Author, actor, comedian, the list goes on. But behind that extraordinary intellect was a man who spent years in profound personal pain. Stephen navigated his sexuality in an era where being gay in Britain carried serious consequences, professionally and socially. He has spoken with devastating honesty about his mental health struggles, his sense of being fundamentally different, and the exhaustion of living in a world that rewarded sameness. When he finally did speak openly about his identity, he did it the way he does everything, with depth, with precision, with no performance. He simply told the truth, and the truth he told was complicated and human and deeply moving. What his story reveals is something many people forget. Brilliance is not protection. Even the sharpest mind in the room can spend years unable to say the most important thing about itself. His openness gave others the language they had been missing. Rupert Everett. Rupert Everett's story is the most sobering on this entire list, because it does not end with freedom. It ends with consequence. Rupert came out as gay in the 1980s, deliberately, unapologetically, at a time when almost no working actor in Hollywood dared to do so, and the industry punished him for it. He has said directly in interviews that his Hollywood career suffered as a direct result of his honesty. Roles disappeared. Opportunities went to others. The industry that sells courage on screen showed almost none of it when faced with the real thing. What Rupert's story strips away is the comfortable idea that coming out always leads to a better life. For many people in many eras, it cost them everything they had worked for. Rupert Everett paid that price and has never stopped talking about it. In doing so, he has made sure the entertainment industry cannot rewrite its own history. It was not always safe, not even close. Tom Daley. In December 2013, a 19-year-old British Olympic diver sat alone in front of a camera and uploaded a video to YouTube. Within hours, millions of people had watched it. Tom Daley looked into the lens and told the world, simply and directly, that he was in a relationship with a man. No PR team, no crafted statement, no spin. Just a young man telling the truth. Tom had spent his teenage years in the public eye as a prodigy and a sports hero. The weight of that identity, combined with who he actually was, created enormous pressure. Most people his age will never understand the scale of it. But what he did with that pressure was extraordinary. He chose honesty at 19 years old, in front of the entire world, with nothing but a camera. The response from young people globally showed exactly why it mattered. His bravery that day changed the conversation for an entire generation. Andrew Hayden Smith. For a generation of British viewers, Andrew Hayden Smith was a warm and familiar face. His work as a CBBC presenter and his role in Doctor Who made him a trusted figure in family television, and that context makes his story particularly interesting. Coming out in the family entertainment space carries its own unique pressure. The audience is broad, the expectations around identity are often conservative, and the fear of changing how people see you is very real. Andrew Hayden Smith chose honesty anyway. He has spoken openly about his life as a gay man in the public eye, navigating an industry that does not always make that straightforward. His story matters because it reminds us that courage does not only belong to the biggest names, it belongs to every person who steps in front of a camera, builds a relationship of trust with an audience, and then decides to let them see the real version of themselves. That decision always costs something, and it always matters. Every name on this list carried something the world was not supposed to see. Some hid for years, some hid forever, some paid a professional price for telling the truth. But what all 15 of these men share is this. Eventually, the real story came out, and it was always more powerful than the one the industry tried to tell. Which story hit you hardest? Drop it in the comments. We read every single one.